Welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, sponsored by opednews.com, available on Pacifica Radio Network, Progressive Radio Network, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and more. It's also available, the most comprehensive listing of all the interviews I've done is available at opednews.com/podcasts. My guest for this show is Geoffrey Berwind. He's a coach to people who want to get media coverage. I met him through the National Publicity Summit, where he's a coach, where he coaches people on how to pitch the media. His website is storytellingsuccess.com. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you. And great to see you.
Great to be with you, Rob.
Now, I think I underdescribed you, though, in terms of pitching, teaching people how to pitch the media. You do a lot more than that, really. And frankly, I've talked to and met people who you've worked with, and they just rave about your work.
Thank you. And being described is a wonderful thing, because then we can build on that. I have a variety of hats I wear here working with Steve Harrison, and I help people pitch the media. I help people craft their own stories in order to be a better speaker and communicator and do media, and also help people apply for TEDx talks and messaging in general as it applies to people's websites, help people create their own mission statements, and sort of hone in on what is the essential, simple message that the average person, especially their ideal customer or audience, needs to hear in order to come forward.
That's a lot of valuable stuff. It's pretty much the stuff you need to do if you want to get the word out about your work, your book, your video, or whatever it is. So what do you usually start with when you meet somebody?
You know, when I first meet one of our clients, one of the things, it depends. So we do the National Publicity Summit. We have other programs, speaker training, Quantum Leap. But in the beginning of it all, most of our clients are entrepreneurs. In many cases, they're authors. And they want to bring something powerful to the marketplace, but because it's normal for most of us to be so close to our own stuff, that we need others to say, you know, that seems to be a core message. Where I start is I want to know somebody's why. So if you think about it as a speaker, or we're pitching the media, or whatever it is, we're usually invited or even paid to teach something. Give us the how-tos to do something, the what and the how, I call it. Storytelling and compelling messaging is about the why and the who. Why and the who. Who are you trying to influence, impact, heal, help? And if you craft your own story, why do you do this work? In almost every case, again, I work primarily with entrepreneurs, but also with nonprofits, companies, college students. In today's society, if we're not able to express our why, we're missing a core component of messaging. Millennials are famously interested in both paycheck and purpose. And what's valued today is authenticity. Because we're swamped with information. With the advent of the internet and 24/7 news and everything like that, we have so much coming at us that how are we going to cut through it? And I think one of our great advantages of how to cut through technology and the overwhelm is to be ourselves, to be human, to be with people, and to be ready to express, you know, this matters to me because, and fill in that blank. In many cases, entrepreneurs are doing something for customers who are dealing with something they may have dealt with, the entrepreneur, before in earlier days. What do you know now that you had to get through in order to now help others? That should be crafted into what I call the why I do what I do story.
When I coach politicians who are running for office, my theory is you reach people a lot more effectively if you touch their hearts than if you touch their heads. So if you just give them information and facts, you're touching one part of them. But if you touch their heart, and you do that by telling them stories from your life that are the reason that you care about those facts and those issues, you're actually connecting with a person much more deeply, and that's going to last more, it's going to affect them more, and it's going to be a lot more effective in getting through to them.
Exactly. Isn't there a phrase out there about don't tell me what you know until I know why you care? or something like that. Or maybe I coined it. I don't think so, but that's possible. Maybe we both coined
it. So, why are you somebody who should be teaching people about this? What are your credentials? What is your experience that you bring to the table with this? And you've been doing this a long time, I know.
I have been doing it a long time. So in many answers to that, but I would say the focus on storytelling, I was very fortunate to be invited onto a project just before this wave developed of storytelling. So back in 2004, I live outside the Philadelphia area. And I had to reinvent my life. I was brought up to art history major at George Washington University. Art history major, very valuable in the marketplace. And was brought up to run my family's retail stores outside Philadelphia. And they'd come eventually to the end of their life cycle. So in my late 30s, early 40s, I was faced with having to reinvent my career and art history major. And I had observed in Philadelphia and most major cities, the arts are a gigantic economic driver, worth billions in revenue, tourism, restaurants. I observed that in Philadelphia, and near where we are, where I'm right now talking to you, a small, older suburb of Philadelphia was really struggling economically. And I thought, well, what if not only could I reinvent my path, but also help this town through starting a theater, a high-level community theater, involve all the conflicting elements, Democrats, Republicans, grandparents, grandchildren, different races, different genders. And I ended up starting a theater and brought everybody together for a time and did theater plus, I call it. I used what I knew about publicity to do show plus events to get publicity to drive box office traffic. And that really worked. We convinced the SEPTA, which is Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, to let us use a train station for 10 nights and do a show in the train station. That got a lot of publicity. And that got me on the radar of an organization called Historic Philadelphia. 2004, the governor tasked this organization to create a street storytelling storytelling on the streets of Philadelphia in the historic district that would bring a very dry topic to life through storytelling. We were making it up as we went along. I was their first storytelling and artistic director and ran it for 7 years, teamed with a whole wonderful team of people. The thing is still running 17 years later.
Yeah.
Called Once Upon a Nation. And the pivotal moment for me, because back then storytelling wasn't the pervasive communications tool it is now, although it's the oldest thing we do as a species.
I think that stories affected our evolution and the development of our brains. I think our brains evolved to tell and process stories.
100% agree with you. In fact, you can Google, there's lots of good articles about the brain science behind storytelling. Now that there are MRIs, they're doing studies what storytelling, story listening, it releases dopamine. There's neural coupling, there's mirroring, but it's what you said more simply, which is we're wired for this. It's the oldest thing we've done for 1 million years. We process the world through stories. So in this Once Upon a Nation program, we figured out a way to have slices of American history focused where it all happened. Most of it happened in Philadelphia over 4 centuries. And I saw over 7 years, thousands of reactions to story scripts that we created that were delivered naturally on the streets by a storyteller at a bench. And that was the foundation of the work I now do with other people, seeing in an outside major American city with distractions, with airplanes and buses and tourists everywhere, but a story compelled people to lean in, to listen, to light up. One of the first experiences we had, first week in 2005, we got an email from an 8-year-old boy. And the email was perfect. He said, before I heard one of your Once Upon a Nation stories, I was not interested in American history. But now I'm playing a Quaker spy in my swimming pool with my sister. And I'm like, not quite accurate, but I love it. And so we've seen that storytelling makes dry topics engaging.
Yeah, there's a story, I organized a conference on story that I ran for 6 years on Summit Meeting on the Art, Science, and Application of Story, where I brought together all different worlds of story, screenwriting, novelists, politicians, psychologists, mythologists, ministers, marketers. And it was the first time that anybody had ever done that. And one of the attendees from England told a story about how Truth went to a town, and everybody threw garbage at him, and they yelled at him, and he basically got blown out of town. And he's sitting on the side of the road, and Story comes and walks up, and he watches him enter the town, and people embrace Story, and they give him gifts, and they give him food, and they love him. And then Story leaves, and Story sees Truth there on the side of the road, forlorn and miserable, and says, "What's going on?" And Truth tells Story about how miserable he's treated. So Story says, "Come with me." Puts his arm around Truth and brings Truth into town, and everybody embraces Truth. And the reason is you have to have stories to bring truth.
That's beautiful. That's great. First I've heard that. Well done. I love that. Yeah.
I wrote it up. It's on opednews.com. I can send you a link if you like.
I would love that. Thank you. It's beautiful. And exactly right.
Yeah. Story is so incredibly important and powerful. So give me some of your thoughts about what story is and what makes a story.
Well, in fact, of the metaphorical story you just told, you did what is one of my favorite techniques, and that is the arm around the shoulder. Those details, storytelling, why it's more powerful than anything on a screen, why it's more powerful than the internet when we're telling a story is when you do what you just did, which is you paint word pictures. When you're painting those little details, stuff being thrown at truth. People do not remember facts. In a typical business meeting, 37% people in a business meeting remember the data, but 67% remember a story. Why is that? Because not only are we wired for it, but it's meant to paint pictures. I would propose that I think there's for lack of a better way of saying it, we have a muscle in us somewhere called the imagination. The imagination, think of it. The root word of imagination is what? Image. So if we, as a species, we have all these senses, right? Smell and touch and everything like that. But I believe the primary sense that we use to process life is through our eyes, typically. So if you're telling a story and you're painting pictures like you just did along the side of the road, these little beautiful details, you're triggering our primal imagination. You're bringing us back around the primal campfire. That's why it's always going to be stronger. So when I coach speakers, if they need to use PowerPoint, fine, but never in a story. If they tell a story, that slide deck should go black. It should be nothing. Your goal is to bring us around the campfire. So number one technique is paint pictures so that the listener's brain could fill in the blanks and get fully engaged. You know, they say minimally, I just read a Forbes.com article yesterday, that it's at the 10-minute mark in any presentation, people start zoning out, no matter how good the speaker is, around 10 minutes. That's what's been measured, Forbes.com, lovely article about it. So how do we keep people engaged? Storytelling is one of the most compelling, and you don't need any props, you don't need anything, you just what comes out of your mouth. The other thing that makes storytelling special and where it's focused is on epiphanies. So when you focus the story on a moment, an aha, a light bulb, a change of direction, a change of purpose, an epiphany by nature is a form of light. So if it's the light bulb going off, to be most effective, a light bulb goes off in the darkness. In your story, truth, thrown out of town, nothing's working. What went wrong? It's the darkest hour. It's the dark night of the soul, right? So you focus the story on take us to the darkest point in a story. These are stories of transformation. And then what happened? Where you go, oh. So as you tell your own stories, why Rob Call does what he does, why Geoffrey Berwind does what he does, we have our origin stories that should be focused on stuff we've struggled with, but came out with a new wisdom, a new insight. And so between epiphanies and visual descriptive language, those are my two favorite techniques in storytelling. Clearly, we need dramatic tension. We need the enemy, the opposing force, I'd rather call it. Sometimes there's helpers, Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. But that's where storytelling is unique. And at the end of the day, if you look at any decent TV show, any decent movie, and read any decent novel, they all follow the same formula. Because
let's talk a little bit about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. I love Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. How do you apply that to people who are attempting to get media attention? And I want to throw in one other thing in the conversation. I call this the bottom-up show because I think we're transitioning from a top-down to a more bottom-up culture and way of seeing and doing and being. I've got a book coming out in May called The Bottom-Up Revolution. And people ask, what is bottom up? Bottom up is a way of seeing and doing and being and selling and relating where you have connection consciousness, where you are aware of how you are connected to everybody around you. It kind of ties in with the Native American idea that you make a decision based on how it'll affect the next 7 generations. So I'm interested also in terms of your work and how bottom up connects to story and to helping people to apply your ideas.
And as you pitch the media in particular. So I think, the media certainly, in our National Publicity Summit, we train people how to do this. So the media is as we both know, it's an amazing marketing tool to be able to get your message across, sell books, and so forth. They do have their choice of any expert they want. And today, it's wonderful if you have a PhD in your specialty. It's amazing if you've done this work for 20 or 30 years and have helped thousands of clients. And that's part of your credential. So if you're pitching the media, you need a story idea that's compelling, right? But the secondary pitch is, why should I book you on that topic? I can book anybody on that topic. So you need to be armed with how do you succinctly express your own credentials. So there is what I would call the left brain analytical resume-like credentials. I've done this, I have that, and of equal value can you touch on if you've lived it too. So if you're pitching Parenting Magazine on the 5 ways to get your teenage daughter to talk to you when she comes home from school instead of rolling her eyes, and you have been a family therapist for 20 years, you've helped thousands of parents, you need to say that briefly. But if you've lived it too, say that, because our stories are part of our credential package.
And one thing that I figured out, actually with the help of my son, after telling him about the hero's journey a lot of times, is that the hero's journey is about making it, getting a call to do something differently, then making a decision to do it, and then starting a new life, really, where you're on a road on a journey. And in that journey, you have to meet new people, make new allies and friends, find new skills and resources. And you don't do it unless you're connecting with other people. The journey is all about that connection process. And I think that's really what you're talking about. When people have experience, it's experience with other people and how to do things that help other people, help themselves to interact with other people. And that is about as bottom up as you can get.
Exactly right. Do you feel, for me, I don't know quite why, but I was certainly brought up to be, the firstborn. I know I'm type A. I know I'm the fixer. I struggle with perfectionism, and someday I'm going to get that right. And yet, when I share my vulnerabilities, and when I realize I don't have the answers always, and I'm struggling like the rest of us, I've never had a client over these many years doubt my credential. In fact, it brings us closer together. So it is about connection. In fact, for everybody watching this interview, if you had to write one word down about why you would develop your storytelling skills, it would be the word connection. People, more than ever, why is there a worldwide epidemic in anxiety, fear, and depression? Why is that? Many reasons. What people crave, so certainly it's not news that a red herring is the social media is going to give us 1,000 friends. That's a red herring. That's false. We think because dopamine is being released every time somebody likes a post that, I'm so popular. It's a red herring. It's false. If we're lucky to have 2 or 3 friends in our lives. And so we're craving, if social media is so wonderful, why is there a worldwide epidemic of depression? Something's broken. We more than ever need connection, and that's what we're talking about. People are desperate for real friendship, for real, can I be myself? Can I pull off the mask? People value authenticity. Authenticity. It's a lie that any of us need to have it all figured out. In fact, I don't believe anybody that says that. Superman is Superman, and even he has kryptonite to make him real. So being real, famously, Brene Brown, early thought leader, her TEDx talk about the power of vulnerability, it tapped a chord with millions of views. Why did that? And everybody's referencing Brene Brown. TEDx Houston, power of vulnerability, tapped something very deep. And she's a social scientist. This is no accidental anything. I remember reading a little while back, it was either Inc. magazine or one of the big business magazines, and they somehow convinced 5 top CEOs, like Fortune 10 companies, to really be authentic in this interview. And they all said something similar. I don't know how I got here. I'm not sure why am I the right one to be doing this. And that was one of the early examples of what is now called the imposter syndrome. The imposter syndrome is, so again, bringing it back, when we use our stories, admitting that we've had to struggle too, and we just have a kind of light to show you the way as well, it's compelling.
Now I just want to go back, because you say the one most important word for story is connection.
Yeah.
So talk more about story and connection, because I'm very interested. I mean, the subtitle, my book title is The Bottom-Up Revolution, and it's all about connectivity. And it's so I have a chapter on connection in there. So I'm really interested in what your thoughts are and how connection ties into story.
Cool. I think there's a lot of answers to that for our back and forth. One is scientifically it does, as I've already referred to. Google brain science behind storytelling. I love one of the terms is neural coupling and mirroring. Simple way of saying that is, Rob, if you tell me one of your stories out of your life, my brain, this is subconscious, my brain is hardwired to try to jump into what I'm hearing. It's not my narcissism. It's not my self-centeredness. My ancient brain, my primal reptilian brain wants to join your story. It's looking. So another way of saying connectivity or connection is common ground. Common ground.
So you're talking about mirror neurons, which we now know basically mimic what you're seeing in somebody else. So we literally experience the same thing, the same feelings.
Exactly.
And then the other side of it is you're talking about neuroendocrine stuff, so that when we hear a story, our hormones, our endocrine system starts going active and creating a simulation mode.
Exactly. So here's one mistake some people make as they develop their origin story or which stories to tell. It becomes too much about I did this, then I did that, and I did this, and I did that. Storytelling should be deliberate. And if it's about establishing common ground, and we're looking back on stories that we've lived through that would be relatable with our future customers, audiences, people following us, where is the common ground between your followers and your stories? So I'm not into somebody just talking about themselves and let me just tell you my life story. That's a resume and it's not interesting. That's part of it. So you're strategically crafting what stories have I lived through that the people I'm trying to attract into my world, they would say, me too.
Okay, and we're going to get into that more. We need to do a brief show ID. For YouTube, you've already heard it. It's opednews.com and /podcasts. It's the Op-Ed News channel on YouTube, which you've already found. Otherwise, I'm going to just pause for 10 seconds so I can find the spot and pop in a bumper. And my guest for this show is Geoffrey Berwind. He is a coach for story, for people trying to get media coverage and attention, for people who need to learn how to pitch the media. So tell us how you start with people. What are your first steps in helping them to figure out their stories and what they need to tell?
Well, after I give them a little overview about why we use storytelling and how they can use storytelling, for example, a miniature version of your Why I Do What I Do story can show up on your About page on your website. So most people have websites where people check them out. A little shorter version. If you're a speaker, here's what's interesting. 10-second attention spans. There's a way to craft your origin story. You can have 7 minutes to talk about it as a speaker in front of an audience. In this world, 7 minutes to hold somebody's attention, that's incredible. So I start with, what do you want to use your stories for? Is it for speaking, for media appearances, for your about page, all of the above?
How are they different?
They are different. Well, in a very logistical way. And website languaging cannot go on and on. It's a visual experience. Short paragraphs, no more than 3 or 4 lines. It needs to give just enough that people go, I'm in the right place. But if it's long copy, people glaze over. So a website is a visual experience. So short. Media interviews, it depends how long, but if it's a radio show of 10 to 20 minutes, you're not going to take 7 minutes of that precious time to only talk about your story. So you want a shorter version. Look, there's a way to refer to your story in 1 sentence. I remember one of my clients, an entrepreneur who was at one of our meetings, and she said a 1-sentence story, and the whole audience went, oh. She said, you know, all my life, I have felt like the caboose of a train, but now I sort of feel like the little engine that could.
That's
and
great.
The whole, I know, 1 sentence. Everybody joined that story because they related to it. So I start with, what do you want to use your stories for? And, you know, in many cases, I have a process to help people create their mission statement, which is just a different flavor of an elevator pitch. I like a mission statement to always start with the words, for entrepreneurs in particular, my mission is to help. Notice how that flavor becomes of service rather than of sales. And then you call out to a type of customer, then you identify a few problems they struggle with, everyday problems. The second sentence in that mission statement, it starts with either I can relate because, or I can help because, and I like a very quick credential statement which touches on your professional expertise, but a very quick touch of your story, like I did with the parenting expert. Then the third part of the mission statement is how I help, and then you call out to your products. And the last part of the mission statement is mentioning 3 or 4 results, tangible results people can get when they learn from you as the expert. So sometimes I start with helping them craft that 4-sentence mission statement, as it sounds conversational, because I like that, an aspect of that at least, to be how the story finishes. So if you start the story in the beginning, early days, set up the story. In Hollywood, I think they call that the establishing scene, but the story starts in the beginning, early days. What is the story about and where are we focusing the story? And in a 7-minute story, which I like creating first, the fully told, if you have at least a 30-minute talk or more, or you're doing a workshop, beautifully detailed story. I like 3 scenes, 3 mini stories within that 7-minute story. Scene number 1 is usually the pivotal event that propelled, if it's your story, Rob, propelled you on this journey that usually goes at some point in the story downhill. So I'm gesturing. So it's like a V. Some people say a story is like that. I say it's like this, meaning context. People can see my finger. Context goes first. There's a scene 1 that propels you into a journey. It goes from bad to worse. Things at the bottom is the big scene, the epiphany scene. You come out wiser and more informed. So I help people figure out what those 3 scenes are. In those scenes, details. Where were you? Who was with you? What were you thinking? Dialogue. Between the scenes, we just say, fast forward 20 years. Now I've gotten my degree and I've been working for years and everything on the outside looks great and I'm happily married and the kids look great, but inside I'm dying. And I'll never forget one day I came home from work. I wouldn't even talk to anybody. I went into my room, closed my door, and I just said, I got nothing left. And that was the darkest hour of my life. And then I sat on my bed. So that's the kind of thing, that scene number 2 is that dark hour.
Why do you need that?
Otherwise, it's an anecdote. An anecdote I call story light. Oh, this crazy thing happened. I was trying to get my microphone to work when I was going to talk to Rob, and I had to get, it's an anecdote, story light. You want stories of transformation. Transformation by nature means you, as an expert, have somehow been challenged or struggled with something, and it got not good. but it forced you, again, back to the epiphany. It forced you to, find a new direction, get an insight, create a new product, whatever it is.
So for me, for example, I tell the story that I started this website, Op-Ed News, and I was at the same time running conferences, including the Story Conference, but I was getting burned out on it. I got really tired of dealing with TSA and the travel, and it had really changed, and things started to take off with the website, and then I did something different. I started asking all my users, my readers, my writers, my volunteers to participate in the decision-making process. And for me, that was my epiphany. That was when I realized that taking this kind of bottom-up approach, things started to explode and really take off.
And if you could, knowing that in the ideal, that was wonderful. In the ideal, even stronger if you could focus in on a moment where you read one piece.
Oh, yeah. Now, I used to be involved in biofeedback. And with biofeedback, you do a lot of things with guided imagery. I produced a relaxation tape that I sold over 25,000 copies of over the years. And one of the essential ingredients in doing guided visualization is to keep it real. You don't want to say you're at the beach. You want to say you were at the beach this one time and you remember the details of all the sensory experience of that time. The sun on your face, the sand, the sound of the waves. The more detailed you can make it, the more effective it is for visualization. That's really what you're doing with story too.
100%. So when I call them a scene, I mean a scene. It's really 3 mini episodes, 3 stories within your bigger story about why you do what you do. It's focused on the big epiphany. And you're right about the sensory. Now, I like when it's these sensory details, but not quite the usual. For example, so I'm lying on this beach, I'm surrounded by all this noise, and I'm hearing a radio in the background, and the surf is back there, but I'm just, not too happy. And I glance down and my hand is sort of touching the sand, and even the grains of sand are getting under my nails. And I'm like, I can't even lie on the beach without my life working right. And it's nothing but the little sand under the fingernails. It's a visual pop that makes people there with you. Goal is take me there with you, and then focus on the epiphany. So it's all leading, paint the darkness just enough. You're leading the listener to the epiphany moment.
Now talk about the epiphany. Get into
so if that aha, so back to you. So when you changed everything, you had a hunch, you're going to get input. Give me that part of the story again, Rob.
I realized that it felt great to ask people to participate and use their feedback, and it worked.
Exactly. So when we say the word I realized, that signals to the listener that that's the epiphany. I realized. In fact, think about the word, and I've never thought of this till just now with you. I realized. I made real something that occurred to me. So for that to be most effective, again, if it's a light bulb moment, which I view the same thing as an epiphany, a light bulb going off in broad daylight, I don't even see the light bulb. Your job is to paint the darkness enough. We need to see you struggle both logistically and emotionally. It's like, I'm trying to make this happen. It's not working. And then I had this suspicion. What if, that might almost be as like epiphany number 1. What if I actually asked the frontline people to get their input? I wonder if that might make a difference. And then you do. I'd love to see the story focus on an actual other person who up, from the bottom up, gave you a specific insight verbally on a letter. And we see you looking at it going, oh.
Now, one thing I want to point out that you're doing that I learned from Doug Stevenson, who's another story coach.
Yes.
You know Doug?
Oh, yeah, sure.
And he does a lot of corporate training, is when you're telling the story, act as though you're reliving the experience. And which is what you just did.
And therefore, here's a technique I caution, and people make this mistake all the time. You know the outcome, but storytelling engages us so powerfully is that we are now forgetting that you're okay, I'm okay. I'm back there with you. I'm wondering, you're building in suspense. A lot of people I know, when they start working on their stories, they start commenting on the story before we've gotten there. There's commenting out of the future, or they're doing something worse. They, in the middle of the story, they start teaching something because they can't wait to teach something. No, it taps a different part of the brain. It's annoying. I call storytelling, the brain is taking a warm bubble bath. Don't douse it with cold water in the middle of a story. So you're focusing, and you're never going off on tangents. The job for you and me as a speaker is immersion. The brain is immersed in the story. Okay.
Yeah. I think, it's hard not, when you say bubble bath, I think of also sex too.
Well, most thought leaders would agree with you.
and story is really sexy. Matter of fact, one of the things that I got into my life early, a long time ago, it's in the mid 80s, was heartwarming. What is heartwarming? I learned by accident, because I did that relaxation tape where I had people think of a heartwarming experience, that if people thought of heartwarming experience and they were hooked up to biofeedback equipment, looking at their physiological functioning, that heartwarming would generate positive physiology. Things would relax and get calmer and better. And so I got into what is heartwarming. And one of the peripherals that I learned about is the chill up the back of the neck, which a good story produces. A good story will touch the heart. It'll give you that chill up the back of the neck, also called a frisson. And what I learned is that's mediated by endorphins, our body's natural opiates. The story, the researcher who did the study got a huge amount of attention because he found out that stories and music were more likely to produce it in people than sex.
Interesting.
So story is even more powerful than sex based on that study.
Well, then I must be one of the sexiest guys alive. My storytelling is a lot better shape than my love life.
That's a little TMI there.
TMI, but listen, you went first. It's like, geez, we better keep talking so I can climb off the wall.
Well, let's go into the epiphany a little bit more. How can you give an example of an epiphany or two that you've recently helped one of your clients, one of your coaching people to think about?
Yeah. Well, for example, I got just off the top of my head, I had the joy of volunteering to work with a 15-year-old to get ready for his TEDx talk, which he did in November in Wilmington, Delaware. And he's creating an app that'll help connect patients who have a certain disease by age group to each other so they can connect. It's very cool. Wonderful kid named Cyrus Rosen, son of a famous doctor, and I got to work with him. And as we crafted this talk, we focused in on his epiphanies. So he first came across this idea. He heard this story about some woman named Susie back in the 1970s who came up with pamphilus vulgaris, a disease that they barely knew what it was. She's in her teens. She had to drop out of college, bedridden. Doctors didn't know what to do. And she eventually recovered, but Cyrus heard about the story. Second, he went right into a second story. It's now in the 2000s. We now have the internet. There's now social media, and another teenager gets Lyme disease. But again, she's having trouble connecting and this and that. He moves the talk to, what if, so there's an epiphany. What if I created an app that sort of got people to connect, that helped the doctors, wasn't interfering, but helped them connect for emotional support by age. So there's an example. The audience loved it.
And it's such a bottom-up approach too, really.
Here are two stories. Now, here's how talk ended. It was awesome. And it was a joy to help him sort of do this. He talked about the app and what it's going to do, and then he finished it like this, and he got a standing ovation. He said, remember Susie, that woman I told you about as a teenager in the 70s who really struggled? Well, that woman was able to overcome her disease, and she grew up to be this powerful woman. She got her master's and brought up a family, and that woman is my mom, and she's sitting right there. And then he paused and said, and Mom, when my app is released, I'll show you how to download it. Huge laugh and a standing ovation. So we focused it on, if you're inventing anything, it's an epiphany. He's inventing an app because he heard 2 stories about a problem that was not being solved like he's conceiving. That was one of my latest ones that I got excited about. And this smart 15-year-old, he got it. You can Google Cyrus Rosen TEDx talk.
Cyrus Rosen. And any particular advice about getting approved for a TEDx talk?
It's very hard. It's increasingly competitive. It's a lengthy process. You have to identify. So the difference between TED and TEDx, they're the same. It's a TED talk, but independently organized.
Right.
So all over the world, TEDx organized.
I should mention that I recently had Ajit Pai on, who organizes the Wilmington TEDx, where
Exactly. Yeah, so you have to apply for a license from TED and all these things happen. So you have to identify an organizer that accepts applications. 50% don't, it's by invitation. Then you got to come up with a compelling, laser-focused idea worth spreading and why you're the one to talk about it. Then you apply. In many cases, there's an accompanying video. In some organizers, like the one in Denver, if they like your application, then you're selected to audition. If they like your audition, then maybe it's complex. But so we have to look at it as a long-term project. You have to tie your credentials into the idea, and it must have an aspect of measurable science to it. In terms of the TED ecosystem, they've had wonderful people, but they typically no longer really look for people in the coaching, inspirational, motivational, Eastern science things. They want Western science, measurable things, or something totally distinctive you've done.
So if I'm going to pitch a TED talk, then I should probably include something about the neurobiology of bottom up and the difference between top down and bottom up science.
They value that.
Yeah. Okay.
So what is the idea we're spreading that you can say in 1 or 2 sentences? Secondly, why are you the one tied to that idea? Because for example, I just heard TEDx Mile High in Denver just finished or in the middle of their audition process. For 40 spots, they got 850 applications.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's worth it. It's like trying to get on Oprah or Today Show at this point. You got to really go at it, focused idea, serious. And sometimes if you have a TEDx idea, you may need to spend a little more time with it for another year or 2. Put legs on it. Show what has happened with this idea. So in terms of their decision making, it's very grounded in measurable stuff. And also clearly compelling and interesting and intriguing. I mean, the exceptions might be, in a sense, artists and performance pieces, which they like. Still, it's distinctive and different. They don't want it to be the same old talk you've done for years.
Okay, so we need to do another show ID. So we'll pause. My guest for this show is Geoffrey Berwind. He is a story coach who helps people who are attempting to become speakers or to reach the media. And now what I want to ask you about is mistakes that people make. People come to you, and what are the things you have to straighten them out about? What are the misunderstandings that they have?
Great question. Well, one thing is, counterintuitively, it's not about them. You're using storytelling to create a common, we've talked about connection, common ground. We're selecting stories where your audiences or customers feel like they are aligned with you. So many people feel like, I'm just going to share my story, and basically they're not even thinking of the audience in mind. That's a big mistake. You're looking, where's the connecting pieces? Let's focus the stories there. Another mistake to make is I'm big into scripting out a story, creating a structure to it. Otherwise, we will all ramble. When we tell a story without structure to it, we lose track of time, right? So this is a well-crafted something. So I insist, my clients, we talk out the structure, we create a script, I go back and forth, editing, suggesting, we practice it, and then polish it by telling it. Let it polish. In a sense, and I mean this with great respect, we must get our egos out of the way of the story, because it's about a common shared experience with our audiences. Another mistake people made, I referred to earlier, Rob, is once you've launched a story, refrain from jumping around chronologically. refrain from going off into detours and tangents, don't comment on the story, and don't by any stretch teach anything. Save it till the story is over.
Well, one thing I know, I ran these conferences for 15 years, and one of the most effective speakers I had was Tom Hartman, who does a national radio show on Sirius. And one thing that he would do, that he taught me, is sometimes you tell part of a story, then you tell another story, and then you go on and talk about something else, and then you come back and you weave them together. And that collision of two stories can be incredibly powerful.
Wonderful. And I don't get a chance to tell people that enough, because I think that's a second level, high tier way to use storytelling in a presentation. Is my favorite. I love telling a story, pushing the pause button, do the rest of the presentation, and then bring back the story at the end to tie it all together. That's great. Or an epilogue. I would call that sophisticated storytelling, because it has to be done just right.
And that's what novelists and movie screenwriters do.
Exactly right. Another mistake people make is deciding that they're going to show pictures of things that the story is referring to on slides, pictures of the family members mentioned, pictures of this. Let me be clear. I know most of us use slides for something, PowerPoint or whatever, but know that when we decide to do that, we have deliberately put a competing something on stage with us, which is shinier than we are, more compelling than we are. I don't care what we're wearing or not wearing. If you're going to have a slide, I'm going to look at that and stop listening to you. Big mistake. So during a story, the screen goes black and just tell the story. Then you want to use your slides for teaching. You don't need help. Tell your story.
Okay. I'm a really big fan of the hero's journey, and I'm particularly interested in one part of it, the crossing the threshold. And so do you have thoughts about how that part of the story fits in? I mean, it seems
How do you define that?
Well, in Campbell's model of the hero's journey, you get a call to adventure. You say no, then very often something nasty happens. Like in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker was invited to go help rescue Princess Leia and learn the power of the Force. And he tells Obi-Wan Kenobi, no, I'm too busy helping my aunt and uncle with the farm. And then his aunt and uncle get killed. That's the really bad thing that you talk about. And so he goes, okay, I'm going to go. And he makes the decision. And that's the crossing of the threshold. That's the making of the decision. So I'm curious if you have thoughts about that stage in the story.
Yeah, that's what I call scene one. Yeah, that's my scene 1 out of 3. Scene 1 is what propels the hero into the journey. Famously, arguably, the greatest movie example of all of this is The Wizard of Oz. Second to that might be It's a Wonderful Life. But so what's happening, why The Wizard of Oz is perfection is the hero, Dorothy. What's the situation, the establishing situation in the beginning? She doesn't want to be home. I don't want to be home. I'm bored. I have dreams for something better in full color. This is black and white. And literally a storm lifts her out of that, drops her into a new place. But that's out of her control, I guess. What I think the threshold for that movie is the necessary opposing force shows up quite frighteningly in The Wicked Witch, showing up in Munchkinland. And right there, Dorothy has a decision to cower and be afraid and hide behind the good witch, or to embark on the journey. So I think it's arguably, if not certainly the second most dramatic part of a whole story, is something pushes us out into the journey. That is a compelling something. We all have storms, of either metaphorically or technically.
And then that crossing is the making the decision.
To pull back or to go into the darkness.
So how do you have people handle the decision-making process?
I just tell them to do it.
But they're telling the story about it. I mean, you just say, well, I decided, or do you,
no, it's a very good
fascinating decision at all?
For my clients, it's a fascinating question. I may need to chew on it, because we just do. They They can't resist the story because the fates have pushed them into the journey. And remember, the scene number 2 is the darkest hour leading to the big epiphany. It's really, that is another threshold. I'm thinking out loud with you.
Yeah, no, it's great.
The other threshold is, do you give up? I have clients who have considered suicide and they didn't. That moment in their bedroom when they look at the pills, that is the threshold. And if they're telling the story right, we are compelled, intrigued, worried, rooting for them. And even though they're standing in front of us or on the radio, we're wondering, what will they do? That's a story well told.
Now, I got into the hero's journey because I read Chris Vogler's book, The Writer's Journey, which I recommend strongly. And he wrote, he was a consultant for Disney to do The Lion King. And he came up with this a mimeograph description of the hero's journey that just exploded in Hollywood. And the hero's journey includes the moment like in the dark cave with the dragon. And I think that's what you're talking about.
I am. And sometimes our dragons are simply how we're talking to ourselves. And that, in fact, I believe that's the norm.
I agree. I think
so
that the hero's journey for most people is their transformational arc, their decision to become a new person, really.
Or not.
Or not, yes.
So when you have a hunch and you could say within a story, and I thought to myself, well, what if? I think the what if is a threshold moment. Because even though you have an idea that could be, if you do nothing about it, it remains a could be. So a threshold moment is like, well, I have this possibility. Do I pull back or do I press forward into the wilderness?
And again, I'm really interested in that moment where, how do they decide? What's the process in their heart, in their head, their fear versus their courage? And I have a feeling that could be a very useful nugget to explore with people in terms of putting their story together.
And it depends. And one of my clients, an artist who I referred to actually, was considering finishing. She was in her bedroom and she happened to glance onto her bureau and saw a picture of her mom. And glancing at the picture of her mom, who, as she had forgotten, believed in her, was enough to pull her back from the brink.
That's a great story.
I said
another. I'm paddling my heart, and if you're not watching the video,
right? And notice the visual detail.
Yeah.
Glanced on her bureau and saw a picture of her mom, and she was reminded that there's somebody who believes in me.
And just another piece of science: humans' visual part of their brain is probably 20 times what our auditory part is. Our brain gloms onto visual far more than it does audio, whereas porpoises, it's the opposite. Their auditory functions are much more powerful.
Fascinating. Exactly. And that's why, again, your goal is tapping the imagination. More powerful than your iPhone, I promise you. Images, the imagination, unstoppable.
What about speaking? Now, you coach people so that they can get paid speaking. What specific kind of advice do you give to them, and how do their stories differ? Or you mentioned that they have a different rhythm. They have 7 minutes if it's a half an hour talk.
Or more.
Oh, and you also said that at 10 minutes, people start to get bored. So
just like in pitching the media or doing a radio or TV show or whatever, your goal within the first minute is to make sure I'm hooked into the speech, that I'm sitting there. Okay, good, I'm in the right place, because you don't want, as a speaker, underneath their chair, underneath their desk, they're wanting to check their email or their text messages. That's the addictive temptation today, which we did not face 20 years ago as speakers. So more than ever, as a speaker, if you think you're there to give a lecture, you are now stuck in the 20th century. That may be true for people who have been going for their PhD or they're a doctor or scientist. That's your training. No longer true, though. Audiences do not want to be preached or lectured at. They want to have an experience. It is what it is, by the way. We can't help it. So, and interestingly, my favorite clients are actually scientists and doctors. They get it. They're like, oh my God, why didn't they teach this when I went to my graduate? So your goal is to provide an experience. Now, how many different, there's more or less 4 different learning styles. Some would say 8, some would say 3, but auditory, visual, read and write, kinesthetic. You have choices. So as a speaker, you have information to convey, but don't view that as the main job you have. Your job is to entertain, inspire, teach, get me new insights. And so today, speakers have a wonderful opportunity to realize they have things they can invite the audience to do with them in the presentation. I just came up with a checklist of 25 ideas just yesterday for one of my training calls. And some are super simple. Our most famous client is Jack Canfield, best-selling author in history. And he speaks at some of our events. And he said, and he speaks all the time. He said, many people are kinesthetic. They need to do something with their bodies. And interestingly, Rob, he said, every 10 minutes, have them do something with their bodies, even if it's as simple as raise your hand if, and then ask them a question. Or if you feel like blank, stand up. Or turn to your neighbor and. So these are simple techniques. One of my favorites cannot be more low tech, but if I'm teaching something and I want to hand out a worksheet, the worksheet becomes a fill in the blank. Sounds juvenile, it's not juvenile. You take out keywords and phrases, and as you teach it, because otherwise people are going to read the whole thing and put it aside. But because you're leaving blanks in the worksheet, people are like waiting to fill in the blank. So simple techniques. And so I believe today as speakers, we do best in most cases to be really looking at ourselves as workshop providers. We're doing stuff with our audiences. Way more fun, by the way. One of the simplest things I ever worked on, remember storytelling, instant ice breaking, instant connection. I came up with a very simple technique, which I've done in a lot of my workshops. I pair people up. I say, think of one of your favorite comfort foods and who it may be tied to in your early life. Can't be more simple, right, Rob? How that shifts the energy in the room is unbelievable. I've had 2 70-year-old sisters who are close, sitting next to each other and telling them that story, and they're laughing and crying and hugging. I had no idea that was it. So
how would you use that, though, if you're given, what kind of speech would you use that with, though?
Well, I do workshops. So my goal is to teach people best practices on how to use storytelling for their business, for their speaking. First thing I want to demonstrate is the power of storytelling to connect people to each other and break the ice and establish a human-to-human connection. So early on, I had them do that, and here's the magic. The magic, scientifically, I then say, okay, they do that, the atmosphere in the room has warmed beautifully. Can I have a few volunteers to tell a story they heard? And do you know what happens every time? The person telling the story they heard gets it 90% accurate. First hearing. And then I move into teaching. Why was that? Because our brains are wired for story, not for statistics.
Now, something I gave talks, and I still do, about positive psychology and positive experiences. I've presented at peer-reviewed meetings on the anatomy of positive experience. And so I would do workshops, and I would ask people to write down some heartwarming or positive experiences they had. And I would tell them, it feels great to share them. And so you're doing that. That's what you're basically doing with that. And most people, I would then offer, you have an opportunity now to share one. Not many people would. So
they're happier to tell a story they heard than they are for one of their own.
Yeah.
And then you have a few, the extroverts. Remember, 50% of the room is going to lean toward introversion. This becomes a safe place for the introverts, of which I am one, actually. Will be very happy to share among a group of 2 or 3.
Yeah. One thing in terms of, we've got to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but one of the new kind of marketing is called inbound marketing. Inbound marketing is basically where you don't try to hard sell anybody. You want to attract people to your website. You want to become an expert for them. You want to become somebody who they have a relationship by autoresponder emails and things like that. And it's about stories and messages and free sharing. And telling stories and getting other people to tell stories in the form of endorsements and blurbs is one of the most effective ways of doing that. And so stories are also something that you want to harvest from other people, is what I'm hearing you saying, basically.
Exactly. Your own and other people. It's both. So you want to be armed with your own stories, but also case study stories. You want to example stories of people you've helped. You want to be armed with same formulas. That other person you've helped had their struggles, their dark moments, their epiphanies. But because you're telling a customer story of yours, it's actually what I call the double epiphany, because you're the expert. And as this person comes to you for help, you as the expert have a hunch of what needs to be fixed here. That's your epiphany. Then you lead people. You're the helper in the hero's journey. And you're helping that person overcome their darkness and have their epiphany. So
double epiphany.
Double epiphany.
Yeah.
Go to doubleepiphany.com. No, I'm just kidding.
We've got about 2 minutes left. So again, I want to give your website is storytellingsuccess.com. You are a coach with the National Publicity Conference.
National Publicity Summit with Steve Harrison.
With Steve Harrison. I'm usually there as one of the media. But I've also attended it, and it's powerful. A lot of times people think about, do they want to pay a publicist? What this is an alternative is it teaches you how to do it yourself.
Exactly. Cut right to meeting the media people and learning how to pitch. It's a confidence builder. It's messaging, fitness. It's a way to go to the messaging gymnasium, and you're meeting real media people to really hone your message.
Yeah. So any last words?
Well, I want to thank you for the work you're doing and for having me as your guest. I really appreciate it. And we're both impassioned about storytelling. I think the last word is know that your stories, corporate America would say it's a soft skill. I despise that because it seems like it's not important. I would say developing your stories is one of the most important things you can do as a business owner, as a person who wants to make an impact on future generations. And just go for it. Know that your stories matter, and because your stories matter, you matter.
Thanks so much. My guest has been Geoffrey Berwind. He's a story coach.
Great to be here. Thanks, Rob.